Dog won't stop barking at customs check. Police arrive and what they find inside shocks everyone. Max's ears perked up before Sarah Collins noticed the scent. 6 years of partnership had taught her to read every subtle shift in the Belgian Malinois' demeanor. His muscular frame tensed beneath the tactical vest as he moved toward a stack of antique furniture waiting in the airport's customs inspection area. Morning sunlight filtered through the high windows of Hartsfield-Jackson's cargo terminal, casting shadows across the concrete floor. "Everything all right, Officer Collins?" Thomas Gardner adjusted his silk tie, a nervous habit Sarah had observed. The customs broker's polished appearance, tailored suit, Italian leather shoes, gold watch, seemed out of place among the utilitarian surroundings. Behind him, workers moved through their routines, forklifts transporting pallets of goods. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, though her instincts were on high alert. "Just a routine inspection, Mr. Gardner." "Max is very thorough." She watched his reaction, noting how his manicured fingers drummed against his leather portfolio. A bead of sweat traced down his temple despite the air conditioning. The morning had started like any other. Coffee barely finished, routine briefing, standard sweep of incoming cargo. Sarah had arrived early, reviewing manifests while Max performed his pre-shift exercises. His energy had been focused, normal, giving no indication that this day would be different. "That piece is part of a private collection," Gardner offered unprompted, his voice carrying a tremor. "Being shipped to a gallery in London. All the paperwork is in order." He thrust a folder towards Sarah, who accepted it without taking her eyes off Max. The documents were immaculate, perhaps too perfect, every stamp and signature precisely placed. Max had begun circling the Victorian dresser, his movements growing more agitated. Sarah recognized the signs, the rigid tail, the focused stance, the slight tremor in his muscles. Max wasn't just interested, he was certain. Years of training and countless operations had honed his instincts. When Max acted this way, Sarah knew to trust him implicitly. "Max, check!" The command was barely a whisper, but her partner responded instantly, beginning a detailed inspection of the furniture piece. His nose traced the ornate woodwork, moving systematically from top to bottom. Sarah could see his nostrils flaring, catching scents that human senses could never detect. Gardner's breathing had become audibly faster. When Max reached the base of the dresser, everything changed. His bark echoed through the cargo terminal, sharp and insistent. Not his alert for narcotics, not his signal for explosives. This was something else, a behavior Sarah had seen only a handful of times in their partnership. The last time had been during a trafficking case that had earned them commendations. "Mr. Gardner, I'm going to need this piece moved to our secondary inspection area." Sarah's tone left no room for argument, though the broker immediately began to protest. Workers nearby paused their activities, drawn to the scene. "That's impossible. The flight leaves in 3 hours. This shipment has strict deadlines, and I have all the necessary clearances." Gardner's composure cracked, his professional facade crumbling. He reached for his phone. "I need to make some calls. My clients—" Sarah keyed her radio, cutting him off. "Dispatch, K9 Unit 217 requesting backup at Cargo Terminal B, possible code 6. She turned to Gardner, voice steady. "Sir, step away from the furniture and put your phone away. Now." 2 officers arrived within minutes, the younger one reaching for the dresser. "Hold," Sarah commanded, attention fixed on Max's behavior. Her partner had positioned himself between the furniture and Gardner, a subtle growl rumbling in his chest. The sound was barely audible, but Sarah knew it meant Max considered the broker a threat. "Officer Collins, this is unnecessary. I have connections at the department." Gardner's protest cut off as Max's growl deepened. The broker stepped backward, his shoes scuffing against concrete. Sarah approached the dresser, running gloved hands along the baseboards. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but something felt off about the weight distribution. The wood was genuine antique, but certain areas seemed denser than others. "Get the inspection tools," she ordered. "And Mr. Gardner, you might want to call your connections from our holding area." The next hour revealed the truth Max had detected. Hidden compartments in the dresser's base, masterfully concealed behind false panels, contained a treasure trove of Iraqi artifacts, golden statuettes, clay tablets covered in cuneiform script, jewelry that belonged in museums rather than smugglers' cargo holds. Each discovery made Gardner's face paler. As federal agents swarmed the terminal and Gardner was led away in handcuffs, Sarah knelt beside Max, scratching his favorite spot behind his ears. "Good boy," she whispered, knowing the praise was inadequate for what he'd accomplished. This wasn't just a smuggling bust. The rage on Gardner's face told her they'd stumbled onto something much bigger. Her phone buzzed with a message from the department chief. "My office, ASAP. Bring your partner." Sarah stood, straightening her uniform. Max fell into perfect heel position beside her, his previous excitement replaced by professional focus. Their morning had started with a routine inspection and ended with an international smuggling operation. Something about this case felt different, more dangerous, more complex. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah felt pride mixed with apprehension. Max's instincts had never been wrong, but experience had taught her that cases like this came with complications, political pressure, dangerous enemies, hidden agendas. The dresser had been wheeled away for processing, but Max cast one final glance in its direction. Sarah had learned to trust those glances. This case wasn't over. It was just beginning. Gardner's connections at the department worried her. In her experience, corrupt officials were far more dangerous than street criminals. Stepping into the Atlanta morning heat, Sarah squared her shoulders and checked her weapon. The humidity hit them like a wall after the terminal's artificial chill. Whatever they'd stumbled into, she knew one thing for certain. She had the best partner in the department watching her back. Max's steady presence beside her was all the reassurance she needed to face whatever came next. The chief's office felt unusually cold. Sarah stood at attention, Max sitting perfectly still beside her, as Chief Michael Harrison reviewed the preliminary report from the customs seizure. Every few seconds his thick fingers would tap the desk, a habit Sarah had learned meant trouble brewing. "Officer Collins, do you know what kind of shitstorm you've stirred up?" Harrison's voice was calm, deceptively so. "I've had 3 calls from the State Department and 1 from Homeland Security. These artifacts aren't just valuable, they're part of an ongoing international investigation." Sarah remained steady, though her pulse quickened. "Sir," Max alerted on the furniture. "His track record is exemplary, yes." Harrison cut her off, standing to pace behind his desk. "That's the only reason you're still on this case. The FBI's taking point, but they want you and Max involved. Apparently, your reputation precedes you." He slid a folder across the desk. "There's a warehouse in East Point. Previous tenant was a furniture restoration business. Gardner's company used it as a storage facility." Max's ears twitched at the mention of Gardner, and Sarah felt a familiar surge of pride. Their busts had always been solid, their evidence chain impeccable. "When do we move?" "Tonight. Agent Reynolds will brief you at 1800 hours. Harrison's expression softened slightly. "Sarah, be careful with this one. Gardner's not talking, but his phone records show calls to some concerning numbers, including one from inside this department." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's mind immediately went to her mentor, Detective James Morrison, now head of airport security. He'd taught her everything about being a good cop, had even recommended her for the K-9 unit. The thought of him being involved made her stomach turn. 6 hours later, Sarah and Max crouched in the shadows of the warehouse district. The summer heat lingered despite the setting sun, making Sarah's tactical vest feel like an oven. Max showed no discomfort, his attention fixed on the building ahead. "Team 2 in position," crackled Agent Reynolds' voice through her earpiece. "Collins, you and Max take the east entrance. Remember, we need evidence more than arrests. If anyone's inside, let them lead us to any additional storage locations." Sarah signaled her acknowledgement and moved forward, Max ghosting silently beside her. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a single security light, casting weak illumination near the loading dock. The lock on the side door showed recent use, subtle scratches around the keyhole that most would miss. Sarah stepped back, giving Max space to work. "Search," she whispered. He began a methodical sweep of the perimeter, nose working the air currents. 3 minutes later, Max froze, head turning toward the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Not his alert for contraband, but a warning. Someone was inside. Sarah keyed her radio twice, the predetermined signal. She drew her sidearm, keeping it low as she positioned herself beside the door. Max took his position on the other side, muscles coiled and ready. The door opened with a soft creak. 2 figures emerged, speaking in hushed tones. "Need to clear everything tonight. The customs bust has them spooked." The voice was unfamiliar, but the response made Sarah's blood run cold. "Just get it done. I'll handle the investigation from my end." Detective Morrison's distinctive, gravelly tone was unmistakable. Sarah's training warred with her emotions. Morrison had been like a father to her, had stood beside her at her academy graduation. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Max made the decision for her. As Morrison and his companion turned toward their vehicle, her partner surged forward with a bark that shattered the night's silence. The second man immediately bolted, but Morrison stood his ground, unsurprised. "I wondered if it would be you," he said as Sarah emerged from the shadows. "Weapon-trained center mass. Should have known Gardner couldn't fool that dog of yours." His hand moved slowly toward his jacket. "Don't." Sarah's voice was steel. "Show me your hands, detective. Max won't give you a second chance." As if to emphasize her point, Max's growl deepened, his teeth gleaming in the security light. Morrison's laugh was bitter. "You don't understand, Sarah. This goes deeper than some stolen artifacts. There are people." His hand continued moving. Max launched forward as Sarah shouted a warning. The flash of Morrison's gun illuminated the loading dock for a split second before Max's impact sent both man and weapon sprawling. Sarah moved in to secure Morrison as Agent Reynolds and his team converged on their location. "The other suspect is heading north on foot," Sarah reported, snapping handcuffs onto her former mentor. Each click of the metal felt like a betrayal of everything he'd taught her. "Got him," Reynolds responded. "And Collins, good work, both of you." As federal agents swarmed the warehouse, Sarah knelt beside Max, checking him for injuries. His dark eyes met hers, filled with unwavering loyalty. No matter how complicated humans made things, Max's world was beautifully simple. Protect his partner, do his job, follow his training. Morrison's voice carried across the lot as agents led him away. "Sarah, you need to listen." She turned her back, focusing instead on Max's warm presence beside her. "Clear," called a voice from inside the warehouse. Sarah straightened, squaring her shoulders. Whatever they found inside would have to wait until morning. Right now, she needed to process the betrayal of her mentor, the man who'd shaped her career. Max nudged her hand with his nose, a gesture that always seemed to come when she needed it most. Sarah managed a small smile, scratching behind his ears. "Let's go home, partner. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As they walked toward their vehicle, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Morrison's warning hadn't been just the desperate words of a corrupt cop. Something in his voice, in the way he'd said it, went deeper, nagged at her instincts. But those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to go home, feed Max's dinner, and try to make sense of how the man who'd taught her everything about being a good cop had fallen so far from those same ideals. Sarah couldn't sleep. The digital clock on her nightstand showed 3:47 a.m., its red numbers casting a soft glow across her bedroom. Max lay at the foot of her bed, his steady breathing usually enough to lull her to sleep. But tonight, Morrison's words echoed in her mind. "This goes deeper than some stolen artifacts." A whimper from Max drew her attention. His legs twitched in his sleep, chasing something in his dreams, just as her thoughts chased answers that remained out of reach. The sight transported her back 5 years to the day she'd first met him at the K9 training facility. She had been broken then, though she'd never admitted it to anyone. Her first partner, Rex, had been killed during a drug bust gone wrong. 3 months of mandatory leave hadn't dulled the pain or the guilt. Morrison had been the one to drag her back to work, insisting she visit the canine training center. "Just look," he'd said, his hand firm on her shoulder. "These dogs need good handlers. Rex would want you back in the game." Now she wondered if he'd already been corrupt then, if his kindness had been genuine or calculated. The training yard had been busy that spring morning, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and Labrador Retrievers working through their paces with instructors. But one dog sat apart from the others, watching everything with unusual intensity. When their eyes met, something clicked. "That's Max," the head trainer had said, following her gaze. "Bit of a difficult case. Brilliant, but stubborn. Washed out of 2 other programs for being too independent-minded. Reminds me of someone." He'd given her a knowing look. Sarah had approached the fence, and Max had risen to meet her. No tail wagging, no excited barking, just calm, measured assessment. She'd recognized the look in his eyes, the same wariness she saw in her mirror every morning. "They say he's too intense," the trainer continued. "Won't accept a handler who doesn't meet his standards." Unfamiliar, Collins? It had taken 3 weeks of daily visits before Max allowed her to put a leash on him. 3 more before he'd follow basic commands. But in those silent hours together, something had healed in both of them. By the time they graduated as partners, they moved like one unit, anticipating each other's needs without words. Their first major case came 2 months later. A series of bomb threats at Atlanta's primary schools had the city in panic. The FBI's behavioral team believed it was a former employee with a grudge, but they couldn't narrow down the target. Sarah and Max had been assigned to sweep Roosevelt Elementary. Standard procedure: check the perimeter, then work through the building systematically. But Max had other ideas. Halfway through their sweep, he'd suddenly changed direction, pulling Sarah toward the administrative offices. "Max, search," she'd commanded, trusting his instincts despite her training screaming to follow protocol. He'd led her straight to the janitorial closet, not to cleaning supplies or maintenance equipment, but to a young man huddled in the corner, his backpack full of homemade explosives. The would-be bomber had been the son of a recently fired administrator. He'd chosen Roosevelt not because of any connection, but because it had the weakest security. Max had somehow sensed his presence through walls and doors, following not the scent of explosives, but the human threat itself. That day had cemented their reputation in the department. Morrison had been the first to congratulate them, his pride seeming so genuine. "You two are something special," he'd said. "Trust those instincts." Now, watching Max sleep, Sarah wondered about all the cases Morrison had guided them toward over the years. Had they been legitimate investigations, or had he been using them, testing their capabilities, keeping tabs on their methods? Max stirred, raising his head to look at her. Even in the dim light, his eyes held that same intensity she'd first seen at the training center. He'd never been wrong about a person, not the bomber, not Gardner, and not Morrison. While she'd been blinded by loyalty and gratitude, Max had maintained his distance from her former mentor, always professional but never warming to him. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Every time Morrison had visited her office, Max had positioned himself between them. During briefings, he'd watched Morrison more than the presentations. Even yesterday in the warehouse district, Max had reacted to Morrison's movement before the gun appeared. Sarah sat up, fully awake now. "You knew, didn't you?" she whispered. Max's ears twitched at her voice. "All this time you were trying to tell me." He rose and padded over to her, resting his head on her lap. Sarah ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the powerful muscles beneath. Whatever Morrison had become, whatever web they'd stumbled into, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Max would never betray her trust. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Agent Reynolds. "Morrison's talking. Meeting at 800. Bring your partner." Sarah looked down at Max, who was already alert and waiting. "Ready to help me clean up this mess?" she asked. His tail wagged once, decisive. Of course he was ready. He'd been ready for years, waiting for her to see what he'd known all along. As she prepared for another sleepless hour before dawn, Sarah made a promise to herself and to her partner. No more blind trust. No more letting personal feelings cloud their mission. From now on, they'd do what Max had always done. Judge people by their actions, not their words. The sun was just beginning to lighten the sky when Sarah and Max headed to their vehicle. Whatever Morrison revealed in his confession, whatever dangerous players were about to be exposed, they would face it together. 5 years of partnership had taught them the most valuable lesson. Sometimes the only person you can truly trust is the one who can't speak, but shows their loyalty in every action, every day. The interrogation room's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Morrison's face. Sarah watched through the one-way glass as Agent Reynolds placed a laptop in front of her former mentor. Max sat alert beside her, his eyes fixed on Morrison's every movement. "The Iraqi artifacts were just a cover," Morrison said, his voice hollow. "The real operation is much bigger. We've been moving money, billions of dollars, through art and antiquities sales. The furniture restoration business provides legitimate paperwork for shipping and customs." Reynolds leaned forward. "Who's we, detective?" Morrison's laugh was bitter. "You really think Gardner was the mastermind? He's just another middleman. The organization calls themselves the Foundation. They have people everywhere, customs, law enforcement, museums. That dresser your team intercepted? The artifacts inside were genuine, but they were just window dressing." Sarah's breath caught as Morrison turned to face the mirror, somehow knowing exactly where she stood. The real payload was in the documents hidden in the false bottom. Evidence of wire transfers, shell companies, names of operatives, names that would get us both killed if I say them out loud. Max growled softly, picking up on Sarah's tension. She rested her hand on his head, as much for her comfort as his. Through the glass, Morrison continued his confession, each word adding another layer to a conspiracy that seemed impossible in scope. The Foundation had infiltrated law enforcement agencies across multiple countries, using the illegal antiquities trade as cover for a massive money laundering operation. Morrison had been recruited 8 years ago. His role focused on ensuring certain shipments passed through customs without scrutiny. "Why tell us now?" Reynolds asked. "Because they're cleaning house. Gardner's arrest spooked them. By tonight, every trace of their operation in Atlanta will be gone, and everyone who knows too much." Morrison let the implication hang in the air. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Check on your dog." Ice flooded her veins as she looked down at Max. He had slumped against her leg, his breathing labored. "No, no, no," she whispered, dropping to her knees. His eyes were unfocused, his gums pale. "I need a vet," she shouted, bursting into the interrogation room. "They've poisoned him." Morrison's face went ashen. "The morning security sweep," he said. "They must have—" "Save it," Sarah snarled, already lifting Max into her arms. He was dead weight, his powerful body limp. Reynolds was on his radio, calling ahead to the nearest veterinary hospital. The next hours passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. The veterinarian worked quickly, identifying the poison, a sophisticated neurotoxin that would have been fatal within hours. Sarah paced the waiting room, her mind racing. The Foundation had sent a message. They could reach her anywhere, hurt her through those she cared about most. "He's stabilized," the vet finally announced. "The poison was designed to be slow-acting, probably meant to look like natural causes. If you hadn't noticed the symptoms so quickly..." Sarah sat beside Max's treatment bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. IVs delivered life-saving antidotes and fluids. His eyes flickered open, focusing on her face with effort. "Officer Collins." Reynolds stood in the doorway. "Morrison's given us everything. Locations, names, evidence. We're coordinating raids across the city, but what? The Foundation knows. They're moving faster than we can. Every minute we wait..." Max lifted his head weakly, a low whine escaping his throat. Sarah knew that sound. He was ready to work, despite everything. The vet stepped forward to protest, but the look in Sarah's eyes stopped her. What are his chances if we wait until morning? Sarah asked. The antidote needs time to... And if we don't wait? If he leaves with me now? The vet hesitated. The poison's still in his system. Physical exertion could accelerate its effects. Even with the antidote, there's no guarantee. Max's tail thumped once against the bed. Sarah met his gaze, seeing the same determination that had drawn her to him 5 years ago. They had never backed down from a fight. Not when bullets were flying, not when bombs were ticking, not even when her own mentor had pulled a gun on them. Get me his vest, Sarah told Reynolds, and everything Morrison gave you about their locations. Collins, he's in no condition to... He's my partner, Sarah cut him off, and he's telling me he can work. That's all I need to know. As she helped Max to his feet, supporting his weight as he found his balance, Sarah felt the familiar sink of their partnership. Weakened but unbroken, Max pressed against her leg, their signal for absolute trust. The vet's on standby, Reynolds said, relenting. First sign of trouble. We'll be careful, Sarah promised, knowing it was probably a lie. The Foundation had tried to take her partner, to make his death look like an accident. Now they would learn why Max's personnel file included the phrase, extreme loyalty response. They walked slowly to the car, each step stronger than the last. In the passenger seat, Max's breathing was still labored, but his eyes were clear and focused. Sarah started the engine, the laptop from Morrison on the seat between them. Ready? She asked. Max's ears pricked forward. Their journey wasn't over yet. The Foundation thought they'd sent a warning. Instead, they'd just started a war. The sun was setting as they pulled away from the vet clinic, casting long shadows across Atlanta's skyline. Somewhere in the city, the Foundation was erasing their traces, destroying evidence, preparing to vanish. But they had made one critical mistake. They had hurt Max. And Sarah had never met a problem her partner couldn't solve, no matter the odds. The laptop's screen cast a blue glow across the darkened car interior. Sarah studied Morrison's files, while Max rested beside her, his breathing still labored, but steadier than before. They had parked in the shadows of an abandoned strip mall, a mile from their target, the Foundation's main operations center. Quite a setup they've got, Sarah muttered, scrolling through blueprints of the Heritage Restoration Company's warehouse. Climate-controlled storage, high-tech security, diplomatic connections, perfect cover for moving dirty money. She glanced at Max. How are you holding up, partner? Max's tail thumped against the seat, his signal that he was ready to work. The antidote had helped, but Sarah could still see the strain in his muscles, the slight tremor in his legs. The vet's warning echoed in her mind. Physical exertion could accelerate the poison's effects. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reynolds. Teams in position, waiting on your signal. Are you sure about this? Sarah looked at Max again, remembering all the times they'd faced impossible odds together. The warehouse bombing in 23, the human trafficking ring at the port, the school shooter they'd stopped just seconds before he could enter the building. Every time, Max had put his life on the line without hesitation. Command, this is K9 Unit 2117, she radioed. We're moving into position. Remember, we need their servers intact. That's where the evidence is. Copy that 217. Be advised, thermal imaging shows at least 12 hostiles inside. They're destroying documents. Sarah checked her vest and Max's, tightening straps that felt like they'd been loosened. The Foundation's handiwork during the morning security sweep, no doubt. They had planned this meticulously, assuming Max would be dead before anyone noticed the poison. They don't know we're coming, she told Max, whose ears pricked forward at her tone. That's our only advantage. Make it count. They moved through the shadows toward the warehouse's rear entrance. Despite his weakened state, Max's training showed in every silent step. Sarah could see the security camera's blind spots marked on Morrison's blueprints, gaps deliberately left open for their special shipments. The door's keypad yielded to Morrison's code. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of climate-controlled storage units and restoration workshops. The air smelled of wood polish and old leather, with an underlying chemical tang that made Max's nose twitch. Voices echoed from the main floor. Server wipe at 90%, 5 minutes to completion. Sarah keyed her radio twice, the signal. Through her earpiece, she heard Reynolds coordinating the perimeter teams. In 5 minutes, the Foundation's entire operation would vanish into encrypted digital smoke. Max suddenly tensed, his attention fixing on a shadow near the restoration area. Sarah raised her weapon just as a figure stepped into view, Thomas Gardner, still wearing his expensive suit despite 2 days in custody. "Officer Collins," he said smoothly, "I was wondering if Morrison would talk. Pity about the dog, though I must say he's lasting longer than expected." More figures emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Sarah counted 8, with more moving on the upper level. Gardner's calm smile suggested he knew exactly how trapped they were. "The thing about loyal dogs," he continued, "is they're so predictable. Morrison tells you we're destroying evidence, and here you are, rushing in with a poisoned partner, hoping to play hero." Max's growl was barely audible, but Sarah felt the change in his posture. 5 years of partnership had taught her to read his every signal. He wasn't looking at Gardner or the guns. His attention was fixed on something else. "You're right about one thing," Sarah said, keeping her weapon trained on Gardner. "Max is loyal, but you made a mistake thinking that makes him predictable." She gave the command in a whisper. "Max, search." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Max launched forward, but not at Gardner or his men. Instead, he crashed into a stack of antique furniture, sending priceless pieces toppling. The distraction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Federal agents burst through every entrance, filling the air with shouts of "FBI, freeze!" Gardner's men scattered, some firing wildly as they fled. Sarah dove for cover, trusting Max to handle himself despite her fear for his condition. Through the chaos, she spotted her partner. Instead of engaging the fleeing suspects, he was focused entirely on a section of flooring, clawing frantically at a hidden panel. Sarah remembered Morrison's words. The real payload was in the false bottom. "Reynolds!" she shouted over the gunfire. "The servers, they're below!" The hidden room contained everything they needed: servers, documents, hard drives full of evidence. The Foundation's entire operation, preserved despite their attempts to destroy it. And at a computer terminal, caught in the act of deleting files, sat a familiar face, the head curator of Atlanta's Natural History Museum. "It's over," Sarah told him as agents secured the scene. "Your whole operation is done." Above them, the gunfire had ceased. Gardner and his men were in custody, their carefully constructed world of antiquities and money laundering collapsing around them. But Sarah's attention was solely on Max, who had slumped against her leg, his breathing ragged. "I need medical," she shouted, dropping to her knees beside her partner. The exertion had taken its toll. His eyes were glazed, his pulse racing under her fingers. The next minutes passed in a blur of paramedics and veterinarians. As they loaded Max into an emergency transport, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. Reynolds stood there, holding up a phone showing breaking news headlines. "International crime ring exposed. FBI raids multiple locations." "He saved the whole operation," Reynolds said, "getting us to those servers before they could finish the wipe. Your partner's something else, Collins." Sarah watched the transport pull away, its sirens fading into the night. "He's always been something else," she said softly. "I just hope—" She couldn't finish the thought. "Go," Reynolds nodded toward her car. "We've got this handled. Your partner needs you." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. As she drove toward the emergency veterinary hospital, she found herself making the same promise she'd made 5 years ago when they'd first become partners. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, she would always have Max's back, just as he'd always had hers. The Foundation had thought they could break that bond with poison and threats. Instead, they'd learned what Sarah had known all along. There was no predicting what a loyal partner would do to protect what mattered most. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, warming Max as he slept on his specially arranged bed. 3 days had passed since the raid, and each hour had brought visible improvement. Sarah sat beside him, reviewing case files while occasionally glancing at his vital monitors, now all showing normal readings. "Officer Collins?" A nurse appeared at the door. "Agent Reynolds is here." Sarah nodded, giving Max a gentle pat before stepping into the hallway. Reynolds looked like he hadn't slept since the raid, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. "How's our hero doing?" he asked, peering through the door window at Max. "Better. The vet says the antidote completely neutralized the poison. He'll need another week of rest, but there shouldn't be any permanent damage." Sarah crossed her arms. "Tell me you have good news." Reynolds smiled, pulling out his tablet. "The Foundation is finished. Their entire network is exposed. The servers Max found contained everything: money trails, shipping manifests, names of corrupt officials in 12 countries. Interpol's already made over 60 arrests. And Gardner? Singing like a bird. Turns out he's more afraid of his overseas bosses than prison. He's trading everything he knows for witness protection." Reynolds swiped through documents on his tablet. The museum curator was their financial architect. He used art restoration projects to hide money transfers across borders. Very sophisticated operation. Sarah thought about Morrison, still in custody, but cooperating. His testimony would help dismantle the Foundation's remaining cells, but it wouldn't erase his betrayal. What about the department? How many of ours were involved? Just 3, including Morrison. All senior officials who could influence shipping inspections. Reynolds put his tablet away. "The chief wanted me to tell you, once Max is cleared for duty, there's a promotion waiting. K9 Unit Supervisor." A soft whine from the room drew their attention. Max had woken up and was watching them through the window, his tail wagging slowly when Sarah met his eyes. "I'll think about it," she said, knowing she'd probably decline. Desk work wasn't for her, or Max. They belonged in the field, where their partnership made the most difference. Inside the room, Max lifted his head as Sarah approached. His strength was returning. Yesterday, he'd managed a short walk in the hospital garden. The vet had called his recovery remarkable, but Sarah wasn't surprised. Max had never been ordinary. "Feel up for a visitor?" she asked him. "Someone's been waiting to say thank you." At her signal, Reynolds opened the door wider. A small figure stepped in. Amy Chen, age 7, clutching a handmade card. She had been one of 6 children rescued from a trafficking operation last year, thanks to Max's unique ability to track people even without a scent trail. Amy had spent months in therapy, rarely speaking. But when she'd heard Max was injured, she'd insisted on visiting. Now she approached his bed slowly, her dark eyes fixed on the dog who'd found her hidden compartment in a shipping container. Max's tail thumped against the bed as Amy came closer. His posture remained relaxed, unthreatening, the same instinct that had kept the terrified child calm during her rescue. "I made this for you," Amy whispered, showing him the card covered in crayon drawings of a police dog catching bad guys. "Thank you for finding me." She looked at Sarah. "Can I pet him?" "Of course." Sarah helped Amy reach Max's head, where she could scratch behind his ears, his favorite spot. His eyes closed in contentment, and for a moment, the hospital room felt lighter. Reynolds quietly excused himself, leaving them to the peaceful moment. Through the window, Sarah could see Amy's adoptive parents waiting, their faces full of gratitude. Another family made whole, another wrong set right. Later that evening, after Amy and her family had left, Sarah sat reviewing Morrison's final statement. Her former mentor had detailed his gradual recruitment by the Foundation, how they'd used his gambling debts as leverage before involving him deeper in their operation. "I never meant for it to go this far," he'd written. "But by the time I realized what they really were, I was in too deep. I'm sorry, Sarah, you and Max deserved better." Max stretched in his bed, his movement drawing Sarah from her thoughts. She set the papers aside and moved to sit next to him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "What do you think, partner? Ready to get back to work soon?" His tail wagged once, decisive. "Yeah, me too. But this time we do it our way. No more blind trust, right?" The setting sun painted the room in amber light as Sarah settled in for another night at the hospital. On the bedside table, Amy's card stood prominently displayed, a reminder of why they did this job, why every case mattered. Next week they'd return to duty. There would be more cases, more challenges, more moments when only their absolute trust in each other would see them through. But that was fine. They had proven what they could accomplish together, exposed corruption at the highest levels, and brought down an international criminal organization. Most importantly, they had reminded everyone of an essential truth. Sometimes, the strongest partnerships aren't built on words or promises, but on unwavering loyalty and trust. Max had shown that in every action, from his first suspicious reaction to Morrison years ago, to his determination to finish the mission despite being poisoned. Sarah reached over to scratch Max's ears one more time before settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring debriefings, paperwork, and more questions about the promotion, but those were concerns for another day. Right now, all that mattered was that her partner was recovering. Justice had been served, and their bond was stronger than ever. Max sighed contentedly, his breathing deep and regular. In his sleep, his paw twitched, chasing bad guys even in his dreams. Sarah smiled, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that's what partners do, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4.